Welcome to Tea Squared and our segment about what is tea. Today we want to focus a couple of minutes on the different varieties of all the different choices of loose leaf teas that are out there, the tea plant itself and some of the herbals. Tea is the most widely consumed beverage on the planet next to water. And besides that's also still the cheapest beverage next to water, even when we consider some of the really high-priced exotic and rare teas. We break down the meaning of tea between tea from the tea plant, which is Camellia sinensis, and tisanes, which are essentially herbals. Anything that you could pour hot water over, like chamomile, peppermint, hibiscus, all kinds of other botanicals that don't come from the tea plant. When we talk about tea from the tea plant, we'll distinguish between 5 different categories. We have white tea, green tea, there's oolong, black tea, which most people are familiar with, and pu'er tea, which is still not that well known in the West, but very, very popular in Asia. So teas are all starting at the same point, whether they are loose leaf style teas or orthodox teas, or whether we're talking about CTC, which is what's used in tea bags. The main difference is that really it is a bit like apples and oranges. Orthodox style tea comes from the youngest shoots of the plants, whereas CTC, which is cut, tear, curl, which is what you would find in your typical grocery store type tea bag. When you rip it open, you'll actually see it looks like black pepper. It's almost dust. It doesn't look like proper tea leaves as such. So the main difference is that when we're harvesting teas, orthodox style tea is plucked from only the youngest shoots. So that's called the imperial pluck. It's the 2 leaves and the buds, the 3 youngest shoots. Why is that important? It is hugely important. The main difference is that if you think about the tea plant as any other plant really, any plant on earth pushes all the nutrients into the youngest shoots so that they can thrive and survive and grow. Now that's a really important part. Think of, for example, baby spinach. We eat baby spinach raw. The leaves are tender, they're soft, they're sweet in flavor. But the larger, older leaves, the leathery, large leaves with the big veins, we use them for cooking because they're not as tasty when they're raw. So the same thing happens here. The youngest shoots, the 2 leaves and the buds, are used for orthodox style, full, loose leaf tea production, whilst other parts of the plants are used and they're shredded into these small particles which you'll find in a tea bag. I always really compare it to instant coffee versus freshly roasted Arabica beans, or for that matter, ground beef and a ribeye steak. So let's examine the tea plant a little bit further. The tea plant, Camellia sinensis, is an evergreen shrub that grows around the equator. It likes it really hot and moist, so it does best under humid and hot climates. So tea growing countries would be India, large parts of China, Sri Lanka for example. A lot of African countries grow teas, mostly black teas down there. Japan, Indonesia would grow teas. You would find some teas in South America, but mainly for iced tea production, not the greatest quality of teas. There's one tea plant in Charleston, South Carolina in the States. And now, just recently, tea is also grown in Hawaii, which produces a lot of white teas. Tea like it at high altitude. The higher the altitude, the better the quality of the leaf. So tea is very much prone to the terroir of what it grows in, very much like wine. The soil, the altitude, the climate condition. It all starts with the tea bush, the tea plant. Normally the bush is kept at a 5-foot height, which is called a plucking table, so that we can reach the shoots quite easy. They're all harvested by hand pretty much. The only country that uses mechanical harvesting at present is Japan. Japan has very efficient, almost kind of like a lawnmower that would drive over the bushes and clip the young shoots off the bushes at that time. Most other countries, or all other countries for that matter, would use still orthodox style methods of plucking every part of the plant by hand. When it comes to the different categories of tea, it all starts by picking the leaves, and in case of white tea, now this is a white needle or ginseng silver needle. It's a rare white tea. It's made only from the youngest parts, only from the shoots. So these are the unopened buds of the actual tea plant. So these teas are very, very delicate. They're very soft, peachy, kind of buttery flavors you could expect from them. And they're also good for multiple infusions. So in China, you would infuse this about 5 times for sure. And each infusion will be slightly different. You go a little bit longer with each time of steeping. So these teas are the least processed of all teas. So they're basically just picked and then they're sun-dried or oven-dried at very low temperatures. So very, very fine. And that means that they're also unoxidized. White and green teas both would be unoxidized teas. And what that means is that the tea plant contains enzymes. So the moist leaf, very much like if you think about an apple. If you cut open an apple, the enzymes in the air, the enzymes in the apple interact with the oxygen in the air, and that turns the apple brown. So plant matter as such as the tea plant, the leaves of the tea plant, would react very much the same way, which is why green and white teas are unoxidized. So in regards in order to maintain that fresh kind of grassy flavor, the oxidization is not allowed to happen. So if we look at a green tea, same starting process, the leaves are picked, then they go back to the factory, and then the leaves are withered. So that means that they go on large screens and the air is being blown through, so that helps the moisture content to reduce. So the leaves get limp, they lose some of the moisture content. So then after that part, we have to be careful not to let that happen for too long so that the leaves can't oxidize. That means we have to introduce heat. Introducing heat will kill the enzyme and it will prevent any further oxidization from happening. So green teas and white teas dried immediately, green teas withered, and then heat is introduced so the enzymes are no longer active. And after that process, the leaves are further dried, rolled and shaped into many different shapes. This is a Japanese sencha, so it's a very flat leaf, whilst you could find a gunpowder that's more of a rolled type of leaf. Green teas and white teas unoxidized in order to maintain that fresh, grassy, vegetative flavor. So it's really about what style of tea you'd like to make, or the tea maker would like to make with those leaves. The third category of tea, a very, very interesting, personal, one of the favorites of mine, is oolong. Oolong teas are beautiful teas. They're hard teas to make. They're semi-oxidized. So oolongs could be oxidized anywhere between 20% to 80%, depending on how much closer to a green tea or closer to a black tea the tea maker would like it to be. This is a very famous oolong. It's a Tea Kuan Yin, or the Iron Goddess of Mercy. It's got a beautiful kind of subtle orchid note to it, a slight nuttiness. And in this case, the tea would start with the same process again. It's being picked, then it's being withered, the moisture content is reduced slightly. But in this case, the tea goes into large bamboo rollers, like a tumbler almost, where the leaves are being pushed together and tumbled around. That helps the cell membranes to crack slightly and to allow some of the oxygen to get into the leaf and some of those enzymes to start oxidizing. And I'm using the word oxidizing versus fermenting because it is not a fermentation process. Fermentation process is a bacterial fermentation process that would be used in winemaking, for example. So it's not actually accurate for tea. It really is an oxidization process. So this oxidization process would now happen within the oolong, and the tea maker has to decide at what point to stop that process. And you probably guessed by now that process is stopped again by introducing heat, by stopping any activity in the enzymes. In the case of oolongs, the teas are usually baked to introduce the heat and stop the enzymes. In the case of green teas, depending on where the green teas are made, it could be pan-fired, so that's wok-fired in large woks. It could be steamed. In Japan, all the green teas are steamed. So the heat will kill the enzymes, but of course the leaves are still moist after that process. In the case of all of these teas, and then they still have to be dried further and rolled and shaped. So in the case of the oolong, after the enzymes are stopped, a rolling process would happen. The leaves are then put into cheesecloth and they're rolled into balls tighter and tighter and tighter until we end up with these clumps and clusters where they're rolled together in this wonderful fashion. These clusters will also help maintain the longevity of the tea. So a tea like this, where you find these larger and gnarly leaves, would have a longer shelf life than something that is a bit more delicate, like a Japanese Gyokuro, for example, or a sencha. So beautiful teas, kind of in between green and black teas. Black teas, most people in the West are familiar with. We enjoy them on its own, we enjoy them with milk and sugar. We make different kind of blends with it, as we would with all of the others. You might have guessed by now, the starting process of making a black tea is very similar to some of the others. The leaves are picked in the style of, in the case of our orthodox style teas, only the 2 leaves and the buds, to use only the youngest shoots. Then the leaves are withered, reduce the moisture content. In the case of a black tea, we allow that oxidization to fully happen. So we encourage that, as a matter of fact. So most black teas would go into the factory and they would be processed through rolling beds. So these are large conveyor belt type setups where there's a roller and the leaves would go underneath the roller. It crushes the leaves, but because the leaves are of course still fresh, they wouldn't become something like this right away. They would just break the cell membranes, allow the oxygen to go into the leaf and start to trigger the oxidization process. So after that has fully happened, the leaves are then usually baked and we would end up with a black tea. In this process we try to reduce the moisture content to about 2%, in which case no further molding or anything of that matter can happen. So these are really the 4 best known teas for us in the West at least. The next category of tea is pu'er, or also called bo lei, depending on whether it's Mandarin or Cantonese. Now, pu'er is a very interesting category of tea. It's both a style of tea as well as a growing region. So pu'er comes from the Sichuan-Bana region in Yunnan in southwestern China. It is usually harvested from tea trees, so some of these trees are hundreds of years old, but generally a couple of decades for sure. It is a different style, a different type of plant, or a different type of tea plant. It's made from Camellia assamica leaves versus Camellia sinensis. But essentially the tea bush is all one plant. Now, pu'er is the only tea that is fermented, and it's also the only tea that improves with aging. So we have here a pu'er cake, or 2 pu'er cakes. The way that pu'er is made is first a green tea is made, and then moisture is reintroduced into the tea leaves. They are then wet piled for several weeks. So this is a process in which the leaves are wrapped in some cheesecloth and they're stored under very specific climate and moisture conditions. This is a fermentation process very similar to like a sourdough yeast kind of fermentation process, in which the tea undergoes this for several weeks and it kind of ripens. After that the tea is then introduced, heat is introduced, the teas are dried and they're compressed, and this granite molds into these ones are broken off a little bit already, but they're broken and they're pressed into cakes like this. There are essentially 2 different types of pu'ers. One is called a raw pu'er, which is closer to a green tea. It has a bit of the style is a little bit closer to a green tea. It has a bit more of a bite to it. And then there is one where the aging process is sped up, which is the one that is being wet piled, and that is called a cooked pu'er or aged pu'er. Now, pu'er is a bit confusing just because of that, and also because it does improve with aging. So some of these uncooked pu'ers can last for many, many years. They're traded like fine wine in China. I've had the privilege of having a tasting in Hong Kong where we tasted 50 and 100-year-old pu'er teas. So these can fetch thousands of dollars. But for the most part they're still very, very affordable. Quite an interesting tea. Pu'er has also been associated with helping to lower cholesterol and helping with weight loss. Having said that, any teas from the tea plant, it's the plant that has a lot of the health benefits, so you would find wonderful health benefits in all of the different teas, but we'll talk about it in another segment. So in terms of teas from the tea plant, Camellia sinensis, Camellia assamica, those are the 5 categories that we have. There are some other tisanes that are interesting and important to know about. Mate, for example, or called yerba mate, is a South American herbal. Mate is interesting. It's been used by the Guarani Indians of Paraguay, Uruguay for centuries as a medicinal cure-all, kind of what tea also started as 5,000 years ago. Mate is very high in antioxidants, vitamins and minerals. It's a great energy and immune system booster, as well as a hunger suppressor. So we have some beautiful blends with mate. Mate generally is a bit earthy in flavor. It's used in gourds called bombillas. They're hollowed out gourds with a metal straw that it's usually sweetened with, and then there's quite a bit of a mate culture in South America, so it's kind of like a coffee culture in North America. The other main category, interesting herbal, is a rooibos. And so it's rooibos means red bush, it's Afrikaans. Rooibos is grown only in South Africa, it's indigenous to the region. It is processed similar to the tea plant where the leaves are oxidized into this red rooibos here. You can also have green rooibos, so the non-oxidized leaf of the rooibos plant or bush. And rooibos, again, caffeine-free. Rooibos is a caffeine-free herbal, very high in antioxidants, vitamins and minerals, very gentle in the digestive system, very good for skin, bone, hair follicles, many, many health benefits. Other tisanes could be, as we said at the beginning, anything you could put hot water over. This is a beautiful blend of ours called Sleepyhead. It has some chamomile, lemongrass, orange blossoms, and a little bit of spearmint and rosehip. Very nice nighttime tea. And then there are fruit teas, which could be like this cranberry here, which could be a variation of different types of fruit pieces and such. So in a nutshell, this is the world of tea. As a really short segment. Please do join us in some of our more comprehensive segments about the tea world.